Heading south of the Mason-Dixon, this is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 280, covering the week of September 20th through September 24th, 2021. Glad to have you back on the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like our Gab page, and subscribe to our YouTube page. Our YouTube page is a fantastic resource. We have many of our lectures from our conferences there. We have these little 5-minute videos we call Abbeville U there. Of course, you can also get the podcast there as well. Also, when you go to our webpage, abbevilleinstitute.org, A-B-B-E-V-I-L-L-E, institute.org, give us an email address. We'll give you a free ebook, Exploring the Southern Tradition. It is an awesome book, 20 essays in defense of the Southern tradition by Abbeville Institute scholars, or at least Exploring the Southern Tradition, as the title says, by Abbeville Institute scholars, including yours truly and a number of other great historians as well. It's our gift free to you if you just give us that email address. You'll get our Daily Dose of Dixie, generally Monday through Friday. It is how we access you, right? It's how we tell you what we're doing at the Institute. It's how we get you our material that we put on the website every day. And it's also how we keep in touch. So if you want to stay in touch with us, make sure we have that email address. We have great things that we do that we need to tell you about, like our webinars. We've got a Zoom webinar coming up next Wednesday, the 29th, with Kevin Gutzman. So Kevin Gutzman is a fantastic scholar on Virginia, Jefferson, Madison. So we're going to talk about federalism with Kevin Gutzman. We're going to get into what that means for America. And so you want to get in on that. We only have 100 slots. We still have a few left. If you're listening to this on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday before the 29th, hop on over to abbevilleinstitute.org, get on that email list, and we'll send you a link to register for it because it's not on the website. You got to be on the email list to get invited to these things. So make sure you're on that email list. Also, we exist by your generous contributions alone. So if you like what we do, you like the podcast, you like the website, you like all the stuff we do, please consider a tax-deductible donation to the Institute. Just click on that support tab at abbevilleinstitute.org. You can throw a few pennies my way. You can donate monthly, annually, a one-time gift, however you want to do it. We appreciate all the support. That's the way we continue to exist. We don't have the deep pockets like our enemies do, and so please consider that donation. Also, get your Abbeville Institute gear. Just click on that shop tab. You can advertise the Institute with a high-quality embroidered product, a shirt, a hat, a golf towel, something, a fleece. We're getting into fall, so maybe you want to get a fleece jacket, something to wear around that's got that Abbeville Institute logo on it. And people ask you about it. And you can tell them, hey, this is a great organization. They're doing yeoman's work and trying to ensure that people still think about the South and still remember that Southern tradition and what it offers to America. And I think that's the real question for the Institute. What does the Institute offer for America? What does the Southern tradition offer for America? It's something that people should be thinking about. It's something that we've all wondered about as we've gone through these last very tumultuous years. You know, we started this podcast before a lot of this stuff happened with Dylan Roof back in 2015. And it's been this is 280 episodes now, right? So we've been doing this a long time. We do these once a week. So 280 weeks we've been at this. And in that long 280-week period, if you were to go back and listen to every single podcast we've done, some are longer than others. We started out, the podcast is much longer than it is now. But we've covered a lot of this material. I had somebody email me the other day saying we didn't mention anything about the removal of the Lee Monument. Well, we've talked about this in great detail for years about how this was going to happen, about we're against it. But at this point, the barbarians have political sway in Virginia, and there's almost nothing that we can do about it. People have attempted to purchase these monuments. Apparently, some of them have been put in pretty prominent locations in other parts of Virginia. So there is a process out there for people to try to buy the monuments, cities, museums to try to buy these things, and then, of course, put them somewhere where people can still see them. We know that in Virginia, they're not against public display of monuments because just 2 weeks after the Lee Monument's taken down, you have the new Emancipation Monument in Richmond. So that monument's okay, but the Lee Monument is not, even though that monument contains on its pedestal glorification of a murderer, an actual homicidal maniac, Nat Turner. That's there on the pedestal. So we're going to teach all the children, hey, it's okay. Nat Turner was a good guy. Slaughtering babies in their cribs is great. That's all right. But being a general of an army, fighting for the ancient constitutions that have been passed down since 1215, that's bad. But slaughtering people in a crib, that's good. That's good. And also, the monument contains a woman holding a document that has the year January 1, 1863 on it, the date, saying that that's when the slaves were freed in the United States, which of course is simply not true. That's the date of the Emancipation Proclamation, which, by the way, was not the day that slavery ended in America. I'm surprised they didn't put on there somewhere, June 19th, 1865, some other nonsense. So they've got historically inaccurate dates. They've got the glorification of someone who murdered people. And this is all supposed to be about, peace and understanding. I mean, it's ridiculous. So they're okay with public monuments and public squares. And we actually had the last piece of the week talk about some of this, terrorists with planes and cranes. 9/11 was the anniversary. That was a couple of weeks ago. And so this particular piece gets into how, you had this one horrible event, 9/11, terrorists flying planes into buildings, which, of course, is extremely tragic, awful. On the other hand, we don't think that it's okay. We think it's okay for people to tear down the memorials to people that also suffered great cataclysmic loss, and that would be, of course, be Southerners. It's okay. And we know that the Taliban and other fundamentalist Islamic organizations have been interested in tearing down secular history. They've destroyed museums. They've torn down monuments. They've done anything they can to try to destroy what they consider to be anti-Islamic material. And so what are we facing now? I mean, we've got an American Taliban. We've got an American Taliban. We've got an American Islamic State that's certainly interested in tearing down anything that doesn't fit and comport with their view of American history. They're okay with public square monuments as long as they are in line with their history. Now, look, this monument to emancipation, fine, put it up. I mean, I've said for years, put up more monuments. Don't take anything down, though. Put up more. Let's have a full conversation about what's happening. We know, and I remember I had a conversation with someone. He said, when did slavery end? He said, well, slavery ended when most Southerners told their slaves it was over. And that was after the war. I mean, they told them it was over. It didn't come because of an Emancipation Proclamation. In some cases, it was because the Union Army moved into an area. That did happen. But in many cases, it was when the war was over. Now, we know that even then, slavery didn't end, because we know there were slave auctions, as we've talked about on this podcast, in Kentucky in November of 1865. We know that Delaware didn't end slavery till December of 1865. Same thing with New Jersey, in fact. Same thing with Kentucky. Those three states still were slaveholding states up to December 1865 when the 13th Amendment was ratified. So we've got a situation in America where we're historically ignorant. And we're going to glorify a murderer. Yet we're going to take down monuments to a man, Lee, and others who Booker T. Washington, the great black leader in Tuskegee, Alabama, said we needed more of. We needed more Confederate monuments, more monuments to the best men of the South. And Robert E. Lee was certainly among those men. So he was okay with it. We know that there are other black Southerners who are okay with monuments, Confederate monuments. It's just now, because we've got this view of history that's driven by the social justice warriors, that we have a problem with these monuments. And I mean, what else can we say about it? It's the low-hanging fruit. We know that we're going to have a situation where more monuments are going to come down. There's little doubt about that. There's little question that monuments are going to be eradicated across the South. So our job at the Institute is to try to keep alive this Southern tradition, because one day things will turn. One day things will turn. Now, when that day is going to happen, I don't know. But the Irish, for example, who understood their history and just waited, and they waited, and they waited until things turned around. And who knows when that day is going to be for the South. But when you have external pressures as you're getting in the South, it's getting harder and harder. So we have to keep this history alive. If we keep singing the songs, if we keep writing the poetry, if we keep doing things to keep our lineage alive, then certainly things can turn around. But it's going to take work, and it's going to take things like the Institute, and it's going to take people going out and reading the Southern literature, reading the documents, listening to the songs. We're going to have to keep doing these things to keep that Southern tradition alive. And so this week was really about that lineage. I mean, when you think about what we put up this week, I want to start with this piece by Casey Chalk. A good Southerner is hard to find. It's not really. I mean, he's not saying that. It's a play on Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find, which, of course, is a very famous short story by Flannery O'Connor, probably one of her most famous. And if you look at what Chalk is saying, if you look at Flannery O'Connor's literature, you have a situation where O'Connor always has these, as he calls them, grotesque characters, the worst of Southern society. And I know there are other Southerners who don't really like Flannery O'Connor for this. There is a professor at an institution who I follow on social media. He's not a big fan of Flannery O'Connor. And I don't exactly know why. I've never asked him directly why he doesn't like Flannery O'Connor. He's very much pro-Southern, but he doesn't like Flannery O'Connor. But I would assume it's because of the same thing that Casey Chalk is talking about. You have these grotesque characters, and we know Flannery O'Connor loved the South. I mean, she was as pro-South as you can get. But what she has done in many ways is create a characterization of the South that's always the bad. And I remember when I was an undergraduate in college, I took an American literature course, and we read a number of Flannery O'Connor short stories. And the professor was from, I don't know, New England somewhere. I can't remember now. He's an interesting fellow, but he talked about how he believed this was, in many ways, kind of an accurate description of Southerners. And O'Connor understood this. And when you go through and you read what Chalk says about Flannery O'Connor, he says this. He says, yet for all of this, there are certain characters ubiquitous across the Southern terrain that one seldom encounters in O'Connor's literary corpus. Where is the virtuous and generous Southern gentleman? Someone even the Yankee writer Henry James could identify and applaud in the exemplary conservative character of Basil Random. Where is the beautiful, gracious, and hospitable Southern belle like Melanie Hamilton and Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind? Where is the hard-working, hard-scrabble, pious Southerner, dutifully and respectably fulfilling his professional and familiar obligations for the sake of his ascendants, often discoverable in Wendell Berry's Port William series? I grew up knowing such people. I attended college with them and even married one of them. So this is the question that he's asking. Where are these great characters? Of course, O'Connor's response to this is anything that comes out of the South is going to be called grotesque by the Northern reader, unless it is grotesque, in which case it is going to be called realistic. And Clyde Wilson has pointed this out too. You look at movies, all the crazy people are generally Southerners, or they have a Southern accent. I mean, that's the issue. The South is considered by many in the mainstream American society to be this weird place where people are all crazy. These weird accents, they do weird things. But when you look at all the stuff happening across America, I mean, is that the case? I mean, people ignore the fact that the South is not doing most of this stuff. It's Northerners. It's Northerners. It's crazy left-wingers oftentimes that do most of these bad things. The left is always the most violent part of society, whether it's European, American. The European left, and by default, which has been brought over to the United States, is the most destructive element in the history of the world. There's no question about that. And their ideological offspring, which would be the Chinese communists, the Khmer Rouge, the Vietnamese communists, the North Korean communists, all of that. I mean, these people are just as bad. These genocidal maniacs. That's the lineage of the European left. Violent, destructive people. They tear things down and put things up that aren't even, glorify violence, glorify homicide. So what are we left with? And I think that's where we're talking about lineage now. In this piece by Enoch Cade on Monday, I Will Make My Lineage Known, speaks to this. Here we are in 2021, and we're faced with, as Tom Fleming pointed out in a lecture at Stone Mountain in 2015, we're faced with a type of soft genocide. Anything that is considered to be pro-Southern, unless it fits with the left's interpretation of that term, is considered to be bad, evil. In fact, they use that word evil. Now, I don't think, and I could be wrong on this, but I don't think even Lincoln ever called the South evil. He never called it evil. He never said that word. He believed they were wrong. He believed that slavery was wrong, but I'm not so certain he ever called it evil. Now, again, I could be wrong about that. I haven't read everything Lincoln every word he ever uttered on slavery or on the South, but I'm not so certain he ever called them evil. Others in the North did. I mean, we know that the radical abolitionists called Southerners evil. That term, see, what we've done is we've created an American history based on far-left 19th century radicals. They certainly called the South evil, that term evil, but these are secularists often using this term evil, and it has a religious connotation to it. Southerners are evil. I don't know if they really even understand what that word means. But this is the word that they're using to describe Robert E. Lee. You have mainstream Christians now calling Robert E. Lee evil. And of course, we had a wonderful series on Lee, a defense of Lee from a Christian position, not long ago, a 4-part series. It was great. One of the best things we've published. And it defended Lee from a Christian position. Lee wasn't evil. Lee was a Christian. You could say that Hitler was evil. Hitler was a genocidal maniac. Hitler believed in exterminating people because of who they were. The antebellum South didn't have that view of anything. They didn't believe in exterminating people at all. They didn't believe in genocide. So this is where we get this word evil. It's just, it doesn't even make sense to describe antebellum Southerners. Now, people that would go out and lynch people and do horrible acts to people, violent acts to people, simply because of who they are, that is evil. It's very evil. And anyone that does that simply because of who they are, their race, or whatever the case may be, that is an evil act. But Southerners, antebellum Southerners, as Eugene Genovese has pointed out, and even as Fogel and Engerman have pointed out, Genovese was considered to be a conservative later in his life, but Fogel and Engerman were not. They were not. They were on the left. So you can't find much evidence of this by 1860. Southerners had understood that they were being put under a microscope, and they had to have a different type of society. Regardless, to call these people evil is to essentially damn their entire lineage. Evil. And so Cade is saying, look, I'm not going to stand for this anymore. I'm going to make my lineage known. I'm going to tell people that I am proud of Robert E. Lee. And that's exactly what Casey Chalk is saying here. Where are these people? Where are the people that we need a defense of? We need to defend our families from these kind of attacks. Where are the good Southerners? We need to be trumpeting the good. And that's something we try to do at the Institute. We try to trumpet the good, right? I mean, who are these people? We can complain about things, of course. There's always that side to it. And we do enough of that. This is why we have things like the What Makes This Musician Great series that we've been running now for several weeks, almost a little over 2 months now. And we had a group, the Balfa brothers out of Louisiana, Tom Daniel talks about this type of Cajun music, but this is a positive part of what the South is. And look, even O'Connor is a positive part of the South. As people are talking about Southern literature, that's actually a good thing. Even if they just read O'Connor or they read Faulkner or they read any Southerners, that's a good thing. I mean, at least it's still on their mind. But Chalk is pointing out that we've got a problem if that's all they're getting. As he says, O'Connor's literary imagination, though noble, beautiful, and commendable, was at least in this sense incomplete. Non-Southerners reading her work thus might be forgiven for wondering how this part of the country has even survived to the present day, so seemingly filled with personalities possessing an irreversible knack for self-destruction. And given how much prejudicial vitriol is leveled at the South by woke activists, I doubt I'm the only one desirous of something more hortatory and inspirational, perhaps a sort of Southern Lives of the Saints. I mean, this is a good question. And I think he brings up a good point here. We have to talk about the positive side of the South, a positive vision for what the South is and what it offers America. Somebody, again, I've mentioned this a couple of times. A young person emails me, says, hey, I've been told the South is awful my whole life. I don't think it is anymore. I used to believe that. I've come to realize that maybe there's more to this. It's almost like a religious awakening. As you figure out, he's from the South, as you figure out, well, maybe there is something to this thing. Maybe there's something to the Southern tradition that's actually pretty good. It's not all good. You've got a lot of bad in the South, no doubt about it. But maybe there's something to this tradition that can offer America another way forward, another path forward. And I think that's something we're going to try to start doing in 2022. As we're getting to the end of the year now. We're in the last quarter, basically. And so we're going to try to start pushing this out a little bit. What is it? What do we need to read? What do we need to think about? What can the Southern tradition offer people? Is it simply political? Is it this idea of decentralization, the Jeffersonian principle of federalism, which in reality is the Anglo-American principle of federalism? If you read Jack Green, he's pointing out, well, I mean, Americans were simply insisting that they followed this very decentralized federal model that had come out of the empire, come out of the imperial model of England and Great Britain, and not micromanage the colonies. This is what Americans were thinking. Is it this Magna Carta, English Bill of Rights forward? I mean, is this what we're talking about? And then, of course, you've got federalism. Is that what Americans need out of the Southern tradition? Well, I think that is a valuable thing. That is something that is valuable in the Southern tradition. We're seeing it now. If you've lived in a state that hasn't, it's not a blue state, it's a red state, then your state hasn't had as many restrictions as other states in the last 18, 19 months. It just hasn't been there during this pretty hard time in history. I mean, we know that this virus can cause people to be very ill. And so people have been cautious and concerned about that. And I think even I live in a state that hasn't had as many lockdowns or anything else, but people have tended to be pretty cautious about it, I think. I mean, even though you've seen large numbers of cases of COVID and people dying and people getting very sick, and that's tragic, and you want to try to avoid that as much as you can. And people have tried. I mean, they've tried to be fairly cautious and concerned about what they could do to try to keep from getting sick themselves. I've seen it on a daily basis. People are concerned, and they've done things to try to protect themselves and people around them. But we haven't had lockdowns. In fact, the governor tried to lock down outdoor activities, and people just said, we're not listening. They just went out and did it anyways, and so they had to rescind the order. Okay, well, they're not going to do that. So, yeah, keep going to your parks and doing what you want to do. People don't want to be told what to do in that way. They understand that some of this stuff was a little bit silly. Maybe some of it isn't, but some of it's a little bit silly. So we see how federalism works. So is that something that we can continue to hammer moving forward that the Southern tradition offers that model for America. It's a great model. It's something that could potentially do some great good to this American polity that's so divided right now. Federalism offers that. Of course, there's much that's beautiful about the Southern tradition as well. The literature, the music, the architecture. These are beautiful things, and Americans love Southern architecture. There's no other place in the country where people go just to see the architecture. Really, I mean, you can pick a handful of places around that you might go and see. Maybe out in California, there's some places. But for the most part, Americans go to the South to see the architecture. It's like going to Rome or Greece to see the ruins. They want to see it. They want to see that. This is why people still love to get married in Southern plantation homes, because it is the classical architecture. It is the ancient American order, and there's something romantic about it. Those Roman ruins, those Greek ruins were all built with slaves and slavery, and yet we don't blink an eye at that. Oh yeah, let's go to Greece and Rome and see the Forum. Let's go see these old Roman ruins that were, Rome was a vicious slaveholding society. So was Greece. So let's go see these things that were built with slaves. Let's go see the pyramids. Now, there's some question about the pyramids. There's revisionists out there trying to say the pyramids were not built by slaves. But for years, it's been considered they were built by slaves. So let's go see these things that were built by slaves. Nobody blinks an eye. Nobody blinks an eye if you say, I want to have this romantic getaway to somewhere in Greece or Rome. But to the South now, well, that's a problem. But people do it anyways because they realize it's all just a bunch of whining. These old homes are America's real treasure. There was an album from the 1970s. It was, I think, Seals and Crofts or something like that. But the title of the album was Taking It Easy. And it shows the guy sitting in front of a plantation home in the South. If you get the actual album, the record, it's got images all over it. You open up the album, it's got images of the guy sitting out on the lawn there. It's got this image of the antebellum South. And of course, this is the 70s when Southern was cool, but it's taking it easy. Hey, here we are at the plantation, taking it easy. That was an image of the South. It was easygoing, it was free-spirited, it was relaxed. I think that's the best way to put it. It was relaxed. And when you go back and look at the music being produced in the early 20th century, it's what I like about the South. And, everything's nice if it comes from Dixieland. All this stuff. This is where the South for years was positive and why people enjoyed the South. That's the image we want to portray. We did it a few years ago with music. It's not just about complaining and monuments coming down. Part of the problem is people think the South is everything backwards. When in reality, the South offered so much that was good in America. America was the South. I used to say this all the time on the podcast. America was the South. For 80 years, America was the South. The dominant figures in America were the South. And even after the war, many of the most important political figures in America came from the South. Not the presidency, but in the Congress, definitely. So you had this important part of American history that was the South. And again, this is why I think Enoch Cade is saying, I'm going to make my lineage known. One of the first things we have to understand, though, is we got to do this at the local level. And the piece on Thursday by Travis Holt, Voices, and he talks about family. I love Travis Holt's work because it's so family-driven. It's just about a people and a place. They're in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, and it's about his people. Well, that's really what the South is. It's about your people. It's about the people that are yours. And even if you're not from the South, this is something I found interesting. I was going back and looking at I was looking at George Wallace's inaugural address. The one that's 1963, the one that's so demonized because they pull one line from it. But when you look at what he said in some of the other parts of the address, I found it interesting. One of the things he said was he called on people around the United States who had settled in other parts of the United States, and also on New Englanders and Midwesterners and people that had a Southern view of America. And basically what he's saying is this is the Jeffersonian view of America. He's calling on those people to do the right thing and support, at that time, federalism and resist this centralization of America for everything, right? I mean, this is what he's saying in 1963. Now, the issue he's talking about, we could say in 2021 was bad, but the principle is still there. The principle, the idea behind it. There are Jeffersonians all over America. There are people, we get emails, they're all over the world. There are Jeffersonians. We get people all the time, emails from people. I live in this part of the country. I live here. I live in France. I live in, I live somewhere else, and I am just completely in love with the Southern tradition. And we know Southerners, we've talked about the Greens, for example, how they moved to Paris because they saw in Paris allies in the French. The French had been defeated like the South, and there was that with them. They had that. Virginia was their country. Paris was the country that they moved to. But it was something that was real and tangible. They had a common cause with these people who had been defeated by the Germans, by the Prussians, just as Americans in many ways have been defeated by the Germans too, these 48ers that were here. But I mean, you had this common cause. So all of that working together, all this beauty is there, and all these people can come together under these very Southern views of America. And if we can just do that, I think that is the key to understanding where we're going in the future. And those monuments were symbols of this, which is why they've got to be taken down by the left. You can't have a symbol of defiance, and they've said it. You can't have a symbol of defiance to central authority. You can't have a symbol of defiance to the empire. If you do, it has to go. Now, states are trying to protect these things, some more effectively than others. Virginia's a lost cause for now. Maybe a Republican governor comes back in and these things get put back up. I don't know. I don't think any Republican would do that. Virginia's gone. I mean, you've got too many people from other parts of the United States moving into Northern Virginia. It's not even Virginia anymore. But the rest of the state needs to think about getting out, leaving Northern Virginia to be its own state. That really needs to happen. In fact, when we talk about D.C. statehood, no. What they should do is just break off the northern part of Virginia, make that into a state, and then the rest of Virginia, real Virginia, can have 2 senators. They'll balance each other out. And you can actually have a real Virginia. And all these monuments wouldn't have been taken down without question. They would have stayed. So anyways, hope you enjoyed the material this week at the Abbeville Institute. Until next time, good day.